Hi, I'm James Williams and speaking to you from Portsmouth on the south coast of England. Okay, I got interested in men's issues way back in 2004 after overcoming a difficult illness, and I joined Fathers for Justice. Now, at the time, I'm not a divorced person. I hadn't got any separation issues or child issues. It's just that I could see that family breakdown was becoming a major problem within our society. And when you looked at it, I found that it was also a major problem against over much of the Western world. But I couldn't do anything about the world. So joining Fathers for Justice, I was basically lending support the best way I could. So I'd turn up to demonstrations, to meetings, and meet all sorts of guys and women as well, who were involved in the movement for fathers to try and get fathers back into the family, for mainly getting men to be able to see their children, and that was a major issue. And it seemed to be that the authorities at the time seemed to think that fathers were not necessary, so we were fighting uphill battle. And I soon found out that there wasn't a lot of sympathy from officialdom towards fathers, although there was quite a lot of support in the general public, though that support was more just vocal and just, yeah, I think you've got a point there, rather than actually making much of a difference. So yeah, one of the roles I got involved with was I found I could do counselling work. So some of the guys I spoke to, talked to, listened to, mainly listening is an important thing. I came to the conclusion, so in the majority of cases I thought, how could anyone do horrible things to this guy? This guy's really nice fellow, and that. Why is it that he's been denied access to his children, and the courts are being mean to him, and nothing's enforced? If you get court orders, they're totally meaningless. And I started to look into it further, and it seemed to me that there was a bigger problem involved in this. And I come up against fairly soon the problem of feminism within the courts process, social services, education, students of course as well. And I found that some of these individuals that had got into these institutions actually hated men. It was actually misandry, misandry it's called. Misogyny is for women, against women. And it was quite bad. But it wasn't just at the meetings and Fathers for Justice. I was finding that people at work were affected by this. Family members were affected. Friends are affected by it, and people further afield. I was working at sea at the time on ships. I was home every other week. So in between times, I was doing this sort of Fathers Justice campaigning, as a hobby, if you like, as a charitable thing. It got very disturbing. Some of the stories, some of the horrendous stories. It was just totally unjust. I think, and in some extent, you felt sort of powerless. You could just sort of go along to a court hearing that this one guy was going through, just to be told, yeah, you've got a right to see your children or not, as the case may be, whatever bogus claim they made against him, and then you just carry on. And it just got to be, it affected me, to seeing it. I mean, one occasion, I had a guy actually broke down in front of me. Not that I said anything magical that made any difference, but the fact that somebody actually listened to him for the first time. And he'd been putting up with this for about 3 years, and it was a lot longer for a lot of people. There were people who'd living separately from their other halves and had rooms laid out for when their son may come home one day, that kind of thing. And they'd keep it up spick and span, ready just in case he walks in the door. I think this is awful, absolutely awful. So I used to do counselling at work as well, because I was one of the ship's officers, and I found that others found that I was an ear that would listen to them and give advice and all kinds of help I could. And also, like people I'd meet on a train or something like that, you get chatting to them. So in 2006 I decided to join a political party. I've been on both sides of the spectrum, so I joined the Conservative Party since they seem to be more sympathetic towards fathers. And in 2008 I got elected as a political councillor in Portsmouth, of which I did just 4 years of that. That was enough of that. But then that just expanded who I met. I had people coming through in my surgery or phoning me up with social problems. And that wasn't really always the role of a political counsellor. That's more of a psychological counsellor role, but I had that sort of aptitude. I could help them with things. And some of them involved, like there was an accidental death of a baby. And, the father, who was not responsible for the death, had just come home from work, having a beer, and then they subsequently found the baby had died. And the mother went crazy, it was a very stressful moment, not blaming anyone for that. If you lose a child, it's hugely distressing. But she got angry and he had to hold her off, and ended up in a domestic violence incident. And he was the one who got thrown out of the house. She started it. And you think, well, nobody should have been thrown out of the house. This is a time for helping them to overcome the tragedy, not throwing them out, splitting them up and send them separate ways. This kind of mismanagement went on all the time. And I found out the true story simply by talking and listening to both of them, which the social services clearly failed to do, to find out the truth. They'd already made up their mind who was at fault. So yeah, that sort of thing went on. So I also, at 2008, I set up a radio programme on the local radio station Express FM, who kindly lend me a 50-minute slot every couple of weeks to talk about men's issues, fathers' issues, and other issues as well. So I'd interview somebody. We'd be talking. Interviewed a doctor on one occasion, and there was other people as well, specialists in their field. So we talk about prostate cancer. We talk about psychology, the problem of feminism, and housing. And not so much housing as getting people housing. The problem of finding homes once you've been thrown out, that kind of thing. So and I thought, well, this is a global issue. This is an issue that's widespread, and it's clearly the case, and they've known about for many years, decades now, that a father in a family where the father's missing, there's a much higher instance of the children going astray, of not succeeding at school, of becoming criminalised later on, having unstable lives, unstable relationships themselves. So, and it was, the hidden cost ran into millions, if not billions of pounds in lost earnings and everything else. But nobody was doing anything about it. The politicians, there were one or two notable ones, but by and large they were lame duck things. They didn't sort of do anything. My radio programme, Men's Matters it was called, ran I think for 4 or 5 years. I can't remember how long it was. I had an overseer to see what programmes I was producing. I had a little bit of censorship to cope with, but overall it was quite popular actually online. I got quite a lot of good reaction online for the content that was put out. And unfortunately, the guy who was overseeing me, he left and went back to another job. So what happened then is that I wasn't getting the same kind of support I did before. And the programme was meant to be broadcast on Tuesday evenings, and then I found out that I was getting 3 and 4 programmes backed up because they weren't broadcasting it for whatever reason. So I used to put it on YouTube, but it wasn't quite the same thing as an actual radio station broadcasting. So eventually that didn't quite work out. But in the meantime, at work, a lot of crew members who needed help got what they could from it, and also the support levels for colleagues and that was quite high. But I don't think that my management appreciated it. They thought that I was a bit too controversial, though they wouldn't say it openly. But I found that I was gradually getting missed out for things like promotions and recommendations for promotions and things like that. And I got the feeling that, I wasn't politically correct, if you know that. But, in the counselling side of things, I just felt that it was very interesting getting into people's heads and getting them away from self-harm and abuse and things like that, and making a little bit of a difference. But there were so many. There's so many people. There's too much to cope with, too much to deal with. And I was just one guy working sort of part-time at it, if you like. And so I've ended being a counsellor in 2012, so I did 4 years of that. I learned quite a lot. I could see that the influence, the feminist influence within the local council, that they automatically assume you're some evil right-wing Nazi or something like that, instead of actually trying to make a difference. So there's a lot of prejudice that way. So I managed to get drawn more into philosophy to find out what on earth is going on. And through radio programs, which encouraged me to do some investigative work as well, I found that there were sinister organisations such as Common Purpose, as it was called, that sort of grown other tentacles and heads. But Common Purpose was an organisation set up by a lady called Julia Middleton, with £3 million worth of money arranged for her by Prime Minister Tony Blair. And the idea is to select leaders. Well, Julia Middleton was a former editor of Marxism to Today, so you can guess what sort of leadership she was looking for. But this organisation arranged training programmes for counselling staff, not so much counsellors. There was only one counsellor amongst the 42 at Portsmouth City Council who was a Common Purpose trained person, and I felt that she was fairly harmless. But they were looking for leaders of a particular type, those that wouldn't necessarily follow the rules. But this sort of ethos seemed to spread across other things, so you've got diversity projects developing from that, and this is where you get your diversity training from. All these things are sort of linked to this kind of programming that they're looking for, people to take over certain things. I think Cressida Dix, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, she's a Common Purpose trained person. But those who are Common Purpose trained seemed to get a buy if they did anything wrong. It seemed to be like, if you did something wrong, you got the book thrown at you, and if a Common Purpose trained person did something wrong, they'd get promotion. I did one of my investigations was, I looked under the Freedom of Information Act, I managed to get a list of all the Common Purpose trained people in the Portsmouth area, and remarkably every school, whether it be primary school or secondary school, had a Common Purpose trained person in there. And that was kind of interesting. I thought, why the interest in children? Why the interest? And then you get this I think, and I cannot prove it because I need to investigate it further. This is why you get sort of Marxist type ideology creeping into the universities, the colleges and that, because I do feel there's been a lot of indoctrination going on to set the table for what their agenda is. And I went in looking into morality, good and evil, because I could see there were things which were instinctively bad, as I felt they were, because they were causing harm to people, to children. So I looked into investigating good and evil, the philosophy of it, and I also came to the conclusion that being an emotional person, I can easily be compromised myself. And the only way I could see, or the best way of getting around that, is you set clear definitions, unambiguous definitions, if you like, of certain criteria, so you can measure your own bias against it. So on good and evil, I came to the conclusion that death and birth were neither good nor evil. They could be either. So a dying thing, somebody dying, it may cause you harm and upset, and that is the evil side. Evil is harm and damage, unwanted harm and damage, and good is benefit, is helping, improving, raising spirits, that kind of thing. So there's a lot, as philosophy goes, there's intertwisting, but it's like the yin and yang. It's the yin and yang from a Taoist tradition, thousands of years old. Anyway, quite useful. And so therefore you create, if you do something good, then something inevitably evil will come back in a certain way, or vice versa. So like, for example, you get a forest fire, which you consider as being evil. It's part of the process of life, unfortunately. But after the fire has passed, new growth will come. So from the evil comes good. So I concluded that as far as evil, which is what I'm looking at, is that there is like an unconscious evil, which is things like tornadoes and hurricanes, which you can't do much about. But in terms of human beings, there were four types of basic evil. One was psychopathy, and psychopathy and all the evils tend to relate around the ability to have empathy, to feel for somebody or not. And so psychopathy was a lack of empathy for other people. And Dr. Robert Hare in the 1970s, a Canadian psychologist, formulated a 20-point questionnaire to help to objectify what psychopaths are and what they were like. But it's been found that psychopaths are basically born with a difference in their brain, an incapacity to understand empathy, or they understand that other people have empathy, they just don't have it themselves. So they can be quite cold-hearted in that respect. But because they don't have empathy, I mean, empathy is important to those who have it, because it's how you learn, it's how you engage with others, it's how you enjoy a book or a film or a piece of music. Empathy is important from that point of view. But it can also make you irrational, and you can, if something traumatic happens, you can put aside logic and reason and just engage in pure empathy. You know, your empathy drives you, which is not always a good thing. It might be a good thing. So the psychopaths were without empathy, but they weren't bigger killers than non-psychopaths. And I say there's roughly about 1% of the population are born as psychopaths. It's not really inherited. And then a second group, I called those the psychotics. Now, psychotics are people who have got mental health issues. Now, they're not necessarily evil, and some of them are very good. It's wrong to sort of cast all psychotics as evil or good. They can be either. But a group of them do come from them. They can be mentally disturbed, and they're not responsible necessarily for what they do. That came into the interesting definition, and this is a definition here, of what is a psychopath. It's not a mental disorder. It's not an illness. It's a personality disorder. So what was the difference between a personality disorder and an illness? Well, an illness, whether it's a physical one or a mental one, is something that the person who has the illness suffers. They're the ones who suffer most. Personality disorder projects the suffering. In other words, they don't feel the suffering, but they make you suffer because of their behaviour. So that's the difference. And that's an interesting thing to measure by. So you've got the group of psychotics who can be good or evil and have really no control, many times, and have no control over their behaviour. So they're not to blame for that. But what they do if it's harmful is an evil, nevertheless. The next group are the sociopaths. Now, sociopaths are distinctive from psychopaths. They tend to get interchanged with the labels, and there are similar traits. The sociopaths are basically people who've been damaged. They have the capacity for empathy, but they just misuse it, or it's a distorted form of empathy. So you'll get your sadists, you get the cruel people, you get people who lock children up in cellars for years and rape them. They'll tend to be your sociopaths. They like to control things. They may have multiple relationships and go through many different jobs, and they are unsavoury people. They have hot and cold spells, like, so you think, well, they're a kind of nice person today, and then you hope to play to their good side. That can happen. They're also known as narcissists. Some people call them narcissists. To me, I think they're the same group, but just different name. And so they can be quite manipulative. And the thing is with them, they can have a certain level of psychosis within them. They can be mentally damaged, if you like. But the thing is about them, because they have the capacity for empathy, and this is the cruel bit, if they can make somebody suffer, they know what it feels like. They can feed off the knowledge that they're not actually experiencing the pain, but they see that they can understand, intimately understand the pain that person is suffering, and they can feed off that. On top of that, the pain of other people helps them to cope with the internal pain they get from their own psychosis. It's like a distractional thing. So can make them a very, very sinister person. And then the fourth group are the possessed. Now, when you say possessed, you might think that possessed by demons. That may well be the case in some aspects. But the possessed are those where the emotional side of things has taken over logic and reason. They're the people who tend to be hysterical, somebody who's lost their temper and sees red and lashes out. That could be a possessed person. And the possessive, again, there may be good possessives, somebody who's just obsessed with things. They can be possessives, and they can be obsessed in good ways, like they're just workaholic types. They could be possessed. So, but in the terms of malevolence, possessed ones are usually the dangerous ones. They're the ones who will pick up a knife and stab someone on the spur of the moment, that kind of thing. And what might typically fall into that category are your hysterical feminists, perhaps, or your people in riots that lose control and just start smashing up everything. They probably possessive people, or possessed people, I would say, rather than possessive. And so that's the four basic categories, and you come across these people all the time. Now, the psychopaths, they say, I'm not to argue with it, there's about twice as many male psychopaths as female ones. But in the sociopath and narcissistic area, I found that there were far more females than males, more than made up for the. And I think one of the things about sociopaths, it can be used as a gauge to see how mentally healthy a society is. So a society that's at war and in strife and got lots and lots of problems, the sociopathic levels, numbers, percentage-wise or otherwise, will be expected to be higher. In a calm and sedate and peaceful society, the sociopathic numbers are low because they're influenced by behaviour. And it's the one thing, if there's children in the equation, then a child who is abused or under the control of a psychopath or a sociopath or a bad possessive or a bad psychotic can end up developing their own sociopathy. They won't be psychopaths, but they might develop psychoses or possessiveness, become overly sensitive, or they could be develop into narcissists. And that's the damage they've done. It's the only time I would say it justifies the removal of children from that kind of environment, because the harm done, it can be permanent. It can be permanent. It can ruin their future lives, their future relationships, their self-esteem, everything. Now, just as paedophiles will find ways of accessing children, so I found that the malevolent types will find ways of getting into jobs and positions of power and influence where they can benefit in their own way, their own perverse way very often, from what harm they can inflict. And in that category you will find judges, you will find, occasionally you'll find a doctor or two like it. You can find politicians, you can find lawyers, people like that who will quite happily drain you of whatever resources they can because they see that you have a particular need and will cough out for it in the hope that you're going to find salvation, and they will exploit it. And it was interesting going to court cases and sitting in the public gallery, and the behaviour of some of the judges was, God, I don't know where they came from. Must have dragged them out a deep swamp somewhere. Some of them were quite malevolent. And some of the and another thing, I'd go to various little conferences and talks and stuff like that, and I'd watched feminists who were, you know, budding social workers, I suppose. I don't know what they were going to be, and they'd go into fits of rage and horror because you were there. You know, a men's rights activist was there. I went to the local MP's office, a Conservative MP's office, and they had this. Was a job training scheme lad there who'd never seen me before. He might have seen me, I don't know if he did. And he made a comment that I was a right-winger. And that was another thing I looked into. What is a right-winger? Well, yeah, why am I a right-winger and feminists are left-wing? You know, how come we've been labelled that way? What makes me a right-winger? So I looked into the definition of right and left, and in political terms, left and right, I think was coined in the 1789, the start of the French Revolution. And basically, is on the left of the speaker were the revolutionaries, and then on the right were the conservatives, and that's how it was labelled. It's got nothing to do with fascism or anything like that, but unfortunately, the mad enemy, I suppose you call them, I don't know what you would call them, decided to label anyone they don't like as Nazis. Well, left. When you look at what politics is about the relationship between the individual and the group or the society. And basic one is like the family. So a person is a member of a family, and it's a group, therefore a mini society. But on the bigger side is the outside locality of where people live, you know, their county, and they're made up of various cells of families, and it goes out from there, and then you end up with countries and even empires. So what it is the whole idea of politics is the relationship between the individual, what the individual brings to the table for the benefit of the society, and what the individual gets out of that society, what the society offers the individual. And the left tend to favour large society, big societies, big control and that sort of thing, so that if you get to the extreme level, it's cradle to grave stuff. They even decide on what you can think and what you can say. They control you intimately, and that's your communist system. But on the right, it's very individualistic, and on the extreme of that, it's like an every man for themselves type society. That's appealing to people who like to go out in the outback and enjoy themselves. But it's nothing to do with Nazism. No, nothing to do with Nazism. If anything, the right, it can be regarded as anarchistic on the extreme, because it doesn't want any society at all, really. But you know, if you're going to benefit either way, you're going to have some kind of a society, so we can actually, you know, put our wits together and each contribute to whatever abilities we've got. But that's basically what it was. So if you look at actually the great wars of the 20th century, you know, you had the Stalinists, the Soviet Union, the Maoists, the Hitler. All of those were all for big society because it gave them control. So from that point of view, they were all from the left side of politics, but they were just fighting over the different definitions of how it went. The likes of likes of Hitler and that, he'd read up all about Marx. He was pro-Marxist, and Mussolini, who created the fascist party, got a commendation from Lenin. So, you know, they were just different elements and shades of the same. And when I was in different political parties, in the Labour Party, there were factions within the Labour Party, and I couldn't understand it. I thought, well, you know, I left it in the end because I thought the Tories are meant to be the enemy to the Labour Party, but they're all fighting each other. So there seems to be that sort of I don't know, way of thinking is extant in them. I want to talk about the concept of absolutism. Now, I went to a presentation several months ago, and there was a guy there doing his presentation, and basically he came up with all kinds of things from climate change to the Holocaust and a few other bits and pieces thrown in. And then at the end of it all, he said, if you don't accept that these things are real, you're a denialist. Well, I thought to myself, well, that's not how people think. Because what happens is with most people, you get presented a number of facts, and then you're given a reason for why these things occur and what happens, and you have a selection or an array of beliefs. You might solidly believe it, you might be skeptical, that sort of thing. But it's not a case of absolutely accepting things. It's a level of belief that you have on many, many issues. And basically what you're doing as a logical brain is you're waiting for further information to verify or undermine which you've been told. So I looked at this, and this seems to be a factor these days, that if you don't accept the narrative that is presented to you by the woke establishment or whatever it is, you're a denier, you're a denialist. And it goes against the natural behaviour of humans, where you have beliefs in things, and there are degrees of strength in believing them dependent upon the facts and your emotions as well. So yeah, that's an important thing. So what happens with absolutism, it is a form of extremism itself, in that it does not accept or brook difference of opinion. And those who are against absolute, in other words, doubters, and doubt is very important to finding out more about a particular subject. If you doubt something and you're interested in it, the chances are you will look to verify or otherwise. And so people who are doubters are translated into becoming haters and racists and xenophobes and all kinds of stuff, when most people aren't like that. You know, they don't form opinions quite so straightforwardly as that. And I noticed again with the likes of the feminists, the far left feminists anyway, or whatever you whether you want to call left or right, many of them come out with this statement like, "But all men are rapists," you know, or that kind of statement. That sort of statement is an absolutist statement. It gives, and nowadays it seems to be that if you're a white male, or white anyway, you're born with white privilege. That again is an absolutist statement. It's not backed up by reality. It's not backed up by reason. And, you know, it puts you in a situation where, whether it's heads or tails, you still lose. You know, and that itself is an absolutist opinion. That what comes along with this is, if they declare that you are some sort of fiend, or you do disagree with what they say, you're automatically labelled a Nazi. That's their outcome. And no matter what you've done, even if you've done something that they consider wrong at the age of 6 or something, you're always condemned. And like I say, if you're a white male, you're condemned anyway, regardless. That to me is unacceptable. That is the basis of totalitarianism. And if these people, as they are doing, slowly but surely, gain power, then it's going to be hell for quite a few people, because a number of the selected group for hatred, the white males, if you like to call it, will fight back and will risk being labelled as white supremacist, even though they're just defending their own. And very often that is the case. And I don't like this thing of just only having a white supremacist. When I brought up in a a talk online, which I got thrown off for bringing it up. When I brought up, I said, well, what about, you know, black supremacists or Asian supremacists or French supremacists? There's all sorts of supremacists when it comes down to it. They didn't like that answer. They didn't like it because it wasn't an absolutist answer. It was one of, you know, saying, well, reality is quite different from what you're proposing. So when you come across absolutist thinking, be very much aware of it. Because these people are, it's not a case of them believing what they say. They know what they say is true. They've taken it on board. There's no any doubt in their thinking. It's flawed right through the centre of their argument. And you can't argue with these people. And very often you'll see somebody, you know, like a woman who knows what she's talking about confronting a feminist. And the feminists will go off screaming and crying, oh, terrible, this sort of thing. And when they go into emotional states, what it is that their absolutist thinking is being challenged. It's an existential threat to them, and it's very real. Their crying is very real. They're not putting it on because they are convinced. There's no doubt in it. They're convinced that what they have been fed and have accepted as the truth is reality. So yes, just be aware of that when you come across them, and no doubt you will do and have done. So what is to be done in the men's movement side of things to improve things? Well, we've got competing interests, and I'm afraid that men's rights issues, even though they are fundamental to the welfare of children, are taking very much third fiddle to things like climate change and political unrest and poverty and racism and all these things. And that's kind of the interesting thing, because amongst the psychopath group, they have a lovely way of wanting to feel like victims. They always want to be victims, even though they're the ones perpetrating the offences. And you see the feminists, and you see them going into hysterics and screaming, oh, I feel like I've been raped, and that nobody's laid a finger on them. And then they've got this basic philosophy of Saul Alinsky, by any means necessary. And they've all got the left-wing side of things tend to have absorbed this. That means lying, cheating, murdering, beating up, criminal activity of all varieties are justified to achieve the ends. It's a terrible outlook. So men's rights, I've got a really tough time. And I've got great sympathies with MGTOW, men going their own way, who want nothing more to do with it. But I'm afraid distancing yourself from it isn't going to save you. It's just that they'll get you when they get around to it. And it's kind of sad. Now, in terms of therapy, because I went through the mill, I found that my workplace, I was getting increased levels of stress throughout, and I was getting nowhere with things. I had sleep disorders and all kinds of stuff, and I've now retired from the sea, and you know, and I wouldn't say living it up, certainly not, but studying hard about what to do about things. So one of the things I found is useful is called ecotherapy. It can be bird watching or things like that, or watching an insect, watching a bee going to a flower and things like, and observing how it does things, or watching, you know, water running along a stream and taking the pleasure in that. All these things are ready-made therapeutics, and even in the middle of a city, you can get birds visiting. If you've got a garden or a tree outside in the street, you can get a bird there and listen to its song. And these things can all be helpful. To help you to overcome the problems you have. And we have each other, and we need to keep in contact. I've come across people who have claimed to have been abused by the system and turned out to be full-blown sociopaths. They will exploit, so you have to be cautious. It means you don't have to disbelieve them, you just listen to people, and if you can help, then do so. But be aware of that everyone you help is not always grateful, and they're not there for real help. They are there to seek attention, like a narcissist would do. You can also take up music and hobbies and go into studying things. And I'll tell you another thing. I came across, I went into various websites and found some really hideous things you have to sign in for, cruelties against children. And you only need to see one of them, and you don't need to see any more, just to focus on how wicked things can be. And it's hideous stuff, and it is disturbing. And if you watch too much of it, you can end up with post-traumatic stress. So be careful about that. But it might be worth just seeing the one thing, and then so you've got it in your head. You know, there's something to be said. Well, you don't need to know that fire is hot and burns. But I tell you something: if you get burnt, you don't ever forget it. And that's important, because when you're fighting these people, these demons, and they've got plenty of money and they're always trying to do you down, when you're fighting these people, you really need to understand what you're up against. When you're fighting a psychopath, there are no peace treaties. They can agree to a peace treaty, but it means nothing to them. There's never a peace treaty with them. Evil never stops and never rests. And somehow we have to support each other when we can, and never rest either. But we have to have respect for each other, our limitations. You know, you can't fight everybody single-handed. You have a limit to what exhaustion levels you can go up to. And we have to stay alive. We have to stay alive because our existence annoys them. And from us, from the men's groups, and includes women as well, because they all want the same kind of thing. There are lots of very good, sensible women. In fact, when it comes to helping men, I found that women are more likely to help men than men are. And so when it comes to helping, we have to understand that we're all human, and every bit of benefit and help we can bring to something may make the tiniest bit of difference, but it may make a lot. Till next time, take care of yourself. Thanks for watching.